In 1897, two British archaeologists started excavating the ancient rubbish dumps of the Egyptian town of Oxyrhynchus. They uncovered nearly 50,000 fragments of papyrus, some of them over 1,500 years old. Amongst this mountain of texts, one scrap was initially overlooked. But on closer examination, its true significance emerged. It was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, a text scholars hadn't even known existed. The fragment is now kept in the Sackler Library in Oxford. I went to meet papyrologist Dr. Nicholas Gonis, who's responsible for its conservation. Look at that. Where's our one?
Ours is, it's this one.
Ah, right. That's...
The papyri came to Oxford in boxes, and this fragment languished in a box for 70 or more years.
It was in a box. Did they not think it was important?
No, it looks very ordinary. It looks like a legal document or a letter.
Oh, okay.
But then if you have a closer look, just for the sake of curiosity, the first thing you see is a sequence called apophthegmaton to soter, sayings of the Savior. And then the very next line, you pretty clearly make out the name Mariame, which is the Hellenized version of Mary. So it is pretty clear that you're dealing with a religious narrative, actually something about sayings of Jesus, so which gets your imagination rolling. And then once you study it further, then you can identify it as of the Gospel of Mary.
Enough of the fragment has survived to identify a story which suggests that even after Jesus' death, Mary continued to exert huge influence. It describes a discussion between Mary and the other disciples in which she reveals details of a vision she's had of Jesus. But her words don't go unchallenged. The disciple, Peter in particular, is hostile, asking whether Jesus would really have spoken privately with a woman than openly to them. He very clearly has a problem with the idea that Jesus might have selected Mary above himself and the other disciples to interpret his teachings. So why did a work which reveals Mary Magdalene as Jesus' closest disciple disappear from history? St. Peter's, the center of the Catholic faith. The basilica is named after the disciple who in the New Testament Gospels Jesus is said to have called his rock and to whom he entrusted the leadership of his church. Peter is the man the Catholics consider to have been the first pope. But what if his leadership hadn't been so clear-cut in the first century? What if there had been an opponent to his authority, and that opponent had been a woman? The Gospel of Mary suggests that that scenario is not as far-fetched as it sounds. According to this Gospel, it wasn't Peter to whom Jesus entrusted his innermost thoughts, but Mary, both before and after his death. The Gospels of Philip and Mary rather scandalously imply that it wasn't Peter who should have been the first pope, but Mary Magdalene. For the male hierarchy of the church, it's easy to see how such writings posed a threat. These texts risked undermining the very foundations of their claims to leadership. But can they possibly be true? Well, here in Rome, lurking under the surface of the city, there's very tangible evidence revealing that certainly, in the early centuries of the fledgling church, women were more influential than is traditionally believed.
we're in the catacomb of Priscilla, one of the many catacombs under the city of Rome. These were Christian burial sites dating from about the 2nd through to the 5th centuries. And you can see here the slots where the bodies would have been.
So they were laid out.
The rock was hewn and the bodies were laid in there.
Keith Elliott is an expert in early art and Christianity.
Certainly, yes.
How far does this extend?
Oh, there's kilometres all over the city of Rome.
The frescoes in these catacombs support the claims in the Gospels of Mary and Philip that women were influential in the early church.
Well, where we're going to now is the so-called Greek chapel.
Oh, look at that.
I know. One of the marvellous things we're going to see here is a fresco which has been dated 3rd century. There it is.
What are they doing?
Well, this is what looks like a Eucharistic meal. We've got 7 people sitting around a table here with bread and fish. But I think the thing to notice here is we've certainly got at least one woman present at the table. The person 3rd from the right is obviously a woman. You see the veil going from her hair over her shoulder.
Yeah,
that might be rather surprising because we're not always used to thinking of women having a prominent role to play in the early church. But this was fairly typical because a lot of the early Christians met together in house churches.
I mean, in the Lost Gospels, women appear to play a much more prominent role. Is that a fair reflection of what was going on in the early church?
I think it is, yes, I think that's true. And the interesting thing is, looking at these pictures down here, is to remind ourselves that they were being painted about the same time as those Gospels were being written. So we've got pictures and we've got Gospels, both of which are emphasising the more dominant role of women in the early church.
Right. In the first centuries of Christianity, at least, it seems women were at the heart of the faith. And in Mary Magdalene, such women found a role model to be proud of. There's no way of knowing whether the Gospels of Philip and Mary really are a true representation of Jesus' life. But they may reflect a 2nd century power struggle between men and women over the leadership of the church. A battle of the sexes. The Mary Magdalene of these Gospels might not be entirely historically accurate, but what she represents is Christian communities where female leadership was a matter of importance, communities where women played a prominent role. And they also suggest that male leadership within the church was not a foregone conclusion. The debate was very much alive.